Maryland wins 81-75, overtime game. It was kind of neck and neck there. It was a tie, not a tie. What was it? 30-28 in the first half, and Maryland comes back and they score more. They have 43-41, and the second half goes to overtime, and Maryland just eventually takes over. And overtime, it was a fun game. It was an interesting game. I feel like Maryland kind of got back a little bit. They scored 40 against Villanova earlier in the season. Now they're scoring 81 against Penn State. Penn State's not a bad defensive team, so it's interesting for them. Burke, what were some of your thoughts on this game?
My thoughts were if they lose at home, like maybe Kevin Willard is looking for a job. But this Maryland team, they are a team that has just fallen far shorter of my expectations than I thought. Like I thought they were going to be a dark horse to contend here, and no, just the way this roster is built, them receiving the full on Jordan Geronimo experience, like it just hasn't been a solid recipe for victory right now.
Yeah,
it's just tough. It's just tough, man. It's a belabored offense that is hard to watch at times.
And that's kind of my thing with Maryland this season is like the offense just isn't there, but I do appreciate how much, effort they're putting into the defensive end. And every single announcer will tell you in the game with Maryland. I think I've heard every single announcer say it at some point in Maryland games. They're like, if they can just get a stop on defense, they can, generate their offense down there. And my thing is like, they do get stops on defense. And then the offense doesn't generate. It's one of those things where like you can see them giving a ton of effort on defense and playing really hard. I think they're top 20 in KenPom and defense right now, which you told me at the beginning of the season, if they were going to be top 20 in defense and like outside the top 100 in offense, I'd have called you crazy, but that's where they are right now in KenPom. And it's really, really interesting. Sonny, I know you did your podcast, so you weren't able to see all of this, but what were your thoughts from what you did see in Maryland versus Penn State?
Well, I mean, big, high level thoughts is there any basketball team that's more grateful of Michigan State being the story of disappointment of the Big Ten than Maryland? Because, I had all of our dear friends, the Turtleheads on, my show when we were talking about the Illinois Maryland game, and we discussed basketball briefly. And, obviously they were very high on the basketball team. And a lot of people were. I had them, I think, dubbed as fourth, finishing fourth in the conference. I wasn't able to watch much of this game because, again, like JR said, we were recording our episode of Illini Cast tonight. But that's just a team which, it's kind of seemed like directionless. It's like, it's like we're really, really trying, but we just can't do it. And, it's kind of I don't know what the word is. Like, is it like pity? And they needed this one tonight. Penn State lost to Bucknell, I think.
Bucknell, yeah.
Early in the season.
I think a plus 300 KenPom team right there.
Yeah. They are not a good team. And, the few minutes I watched in the first half, Penn State was up double digits, I think, at one point. So, I was just like, oh boy. If Maryland loses this game at home, they'd be in trouble. So, for their sake, it's nice to see that, it took overtime, but, just getting that W, they needed it more than, a lot of teams need it.
I feel like Maryland, I feel like Kevin Willard went to the team after this IU game and just basically told them, like, you want to play, you got to play hard, because they played 10 guys in their, or not, they played 8 guys for 7 minutes or more in their game against IU. They played 7 guys against Penn State tonight. I mean, for an overtime game of playing 7 guys, like that's kind of crazy. And Jahmir Young and Julian Reese just basically dragged this team to the end zone and said, you're coming with us. We're not going to lose this game for all the mistakes that you guys make. And yes, Geronimo had a good game defensively and he was all over the place. But for as many mistakes as you guys make, Jahmir Young and Julian Reese just basically said, you're coming with us. We're going to win this game. Get out of the way is basically what happened. I think they both had over 20. think Jahmir Young had 28. So just a crazy, crazy performance by the two of them, and so much heart, so much effort. We talk about Michigan State, their struggles being, maybe they're not trying hard enough, or maybe they don't have that dog in them or something like that. That's not the case with Julian Reese and Jahmir Young. They want to win. They want to make it happen. Burke, you have any thoughts on some of these supporting players like DHS and Scott and, like I mentioned, Geronimo, good defender, but really not producing on the offensive end like he needs to?
Jordan Geronimo, he's the one I know the most about, just because the raw potential that you thought was there for his entire tenure at Indiana just was always so frustrating to see it not just come to fruition. He was good for those nights where he goes 6 for 6, like in one or a few games a season. He gave Maryland the game before they played the Hoosiers, but yeah. And then other than that, Deshaun Harris Smith, like the Maryland fans listening to the Turtleheads podcast, because I do give those guys a listen. It's nice to get an insight into what's going on over there, and it just seems like he has fallen short of every single possibly too high of expectation that those fans had for him.
Well, and the expectation was that Jahmir Young wouldn't have to do it all by himself.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it was like, oh, yes, DHS is here. He's going to help us out. He's going to give us what we need. And Jahmir Young's going to feel like, maybe he doesn't have to do as much. And then I feel like tonight he just basically reverted back and said, if you're going to make me do it all by myself, I will. I mean, he had 6 turnovers in that game, so you don't want to see that, 3 assists to 6 turnovers, but it felt like he had to. It felt like that was what he had to do to win this game. So, Sonny, you have any more additional thoughts on this game before we move on?
No, not really. Again, I wasn't really able to watch, so.
Gotcha. I will point out Clary and Baldwin, big game from them tonight. Wahab, had his normal 9+ rebounds. He had 9 in this game. So I think there's a lot, kind of like I've said in other episodes, I think there's a lot to look forward to with Penn State. I think Mike Rose is a good coach. He just kind of has to get his guys in there and start making that happen. So.